In today's digital day and age, data is a surplus. It's literally everywhere. Organizations are leaning into technologies to change the way that they run their business, make data informed decisions, improve the user experience, and even to improve compliance. But with the use of technology comes great risk. And not just from a data perspective, but who's who, where's compliance, where am I turning to? Is it global? Is it US based? But also in terms of internal adoption and the execution of cyber programs. Add to that regulatory and compliance, and organizations are often finding themselves somewhat lost with how to keep it all together, let alone to make sure they're addressing every caveat of cyber. Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, where we will feature resilient leaders, real insights, and unfiltered stories. My name is Deb Golden, and I'm the U.S. leader of Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory's Cyber Risk Services practice. This episode marks the second in our cyber series, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be talking with Colleen Valentine, Director of Information Security, Governance, and Compliance for NASDAQ. Colleen is on the forefront of cyber in fintech and has some amazing insights to share on cyber governance, controls, regulations, and so much more, including chickens. And I love what she has to say about instilling a culture of cyber responsibility and awareness throughout an organization and the practical metrics that can be tracked to assess execution of your cyber strategy.
Our focus is on culture of security. We really want employees to understand that they're on the front line of defense, that they interact with data, and there's a certain duty of care and responsibility that they have with the data and to be cyber vigilant.
I think you'll be equally as thrilled as I was listening to Colleen's story, not only the journey that she's taking from her career and her education, but how she's been surrounded by strong women who have empowered her to continue that for others and really leading from the front in terms of mentorship, STEM career paths, and encouraging people to find their path. I think you'll really be interested in hearing her advice she has for other individuals in this career. I'm so excited to share this episode with you. Here she is, Colleen Valentine. Before we get started, I really want to get into you and your career path and things, but I hear we need to start talking about chickens. So from what I've heard, you are all about chickens. So maybe give us a little bit of insight into why that's important in your life.
I think I like to balance out all this technology that I'm with day in and day out. So up in Westchester, where I live, we have some chickens. That's the beginning of our farm. I won't commit if we're going to have any other animals in the future. My husband has talked about goats. Right now we have two little chickens. We have Andre 3000 and General So, and they are part of our family.
Oh my God, that's great. I am enamored by the names and that they're part of your family. So we'll have to, maybe do another podcast so we can learn about the goats if they start to join in on the family as well.
Definitely.
Now, as maybe we can get to know you a little bit more, having studied and looked at your background is quite impressive. You've received 2 degrees, started a family, shifted career paths, serve as a mentor and a role model for women, and now report to the CISO at NASDAQ. And it's very impressive. And candidly, and I enjoyed quite a bit reading about and learning about your background. And so you really do, quote unquote, it all in terms of having accomplished so much in your career so rapidly. And so maybe just you can give our listeners a little bit about how you find drive and discipline in terms of that growth, and if there's any defining experiences from your childhood or career that you can attribute this to.
Yeah, I think it's always been part of my nature to be constantly looking ahead and driven. And it's really been a goal of mine to have a career. Growing up, I was surrounded by and still surrounded, which is amazing, very strong women. My grandmother was a operating room nurse. This was at a time where women are either teachers, nurses, or secretaries.
Mm-hmm.
And she was so passionate about that job. And my mom was an educator. Growing up, she was a teacher and then got her master's degree. And we actually, when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, she graduated with her PhD the same time as well. So education, pursuing the next step was really something that was important to my family and is still important to my family.
That's phenomenal. I mean, kudos to both you and your mom. And it sounds like the strong women that you've been empowered by in your life. So again, kudos. When you think about the degrees that you've gained, economics and communications, a master's degree in communications, culture and technology, being in different roles, I'm assuming throughout your career, and now obviously leading in information security, governance, and compliance. Did you ever have a pivot? Did you just feel like as the world evolved and technology evolved, you kind of evolved with it? How did you feel your career start to get you now into, traditionally information security and cyber from kind of where you started?
Mhm. Yeah, and one thing I want to make sure is very clear to the listeners, right? I never had a game plan. I feel like that's one thing that, everyone's like, okay, like craft your 10, 15-year plan, like visualize where you want to be. And what I've always done is taken it step by step and really thought about where the next opportunity or even just next project is. So when I graduated from school, it was the height of the recession. And there weren't a lot of jobs out there. It wasn't easy. I had friends who worked at Abercrombie and Fitch, right? Like they were in the mall and applied to be managers because that was the job that was available and they couldn't even get an interview, right? So when I came out, it was really hard. I didn't have a choice of 5 or 10 different jobs. So I took the job that I was offered. And I viewed that as really an opportunity. It might not necessarily have even been in the industry or the field, but it was a job. It was with a great manager and it was the foot in the door and it was really started that on the job learning. So it was in financial services. So I really started to see that whole shape. I started to see the role technology and people and processes played. And then after 2 years, I think the turning point was it was still the recession. There still weren't a lot of job opportunities. And what did I want to do? Did I want to kind of continue in this job? Did I want to take a step back, really start focusing on communications and get a master's degree? And like I said before, I had a great manager, and she was someone that wanted the best for her employees, even if that meant that the choice was going to be leaving the organization. So she was one who really coached me and said, you know what, I think this is the right path for you right now to make this move, to go back to school, to get a master's degree. And the first job I got out of my master's degree was here at NASDAQ, and I've been here 7 years later.
That is amazing. And again, I'm hearing the same theme, which is wonderful, and I would attend to as well, which is finding good mentors and coaching and really putting people first in terms of that evolution of your career, but also it seems like the people you've surrounded you with. I mean, from your family to the people that you're working with and coming in contact with, is really helping to shape you. And I'm assuming, it kind of gets me into the next one is, I assume that you're also then paying it back. It seems like that's in your nature, and if my deductions are right, you're very keen on the people aspect of learning. And so what would be a good tip or maybe mantra for you to share with our listeners around how you've been able to encourage and coach people that work for you, with you, above you, below you, to always be looking out for others and really helping mentor them as well?
Mhm. I think at the end of the day, it's pretty simple in that we're all people. We all have things that are going on, and really just approaching management as a form of empathy. We've all made the choice to be here, to be in an organization, to have a career, to want a career. But at the same time, we all have personal things that are going on, whether it's perhaps a sick parent, raising a family, maybe even just a tumultuous relationship. And I really want to make sure that my team and our broader team is focused on the people first. You're not going to be a productive or efficient worker if you're not happy, and if you're not happy at work and not happy at home.
Yeah, no, and I think oftentimes people just don't stop long enough to ask simple questions. How are you today? And really
Mhm.
understanding what that means, because sometimes it's really difficult for people to share and to be transparent and to articulate those in the very fast-paced world that we live in personally and professionally. And so I think you're spot on in being able to be empathetic in both personal and professional situations to make sure that you're there for your teams, your professionals, your family, et cetera. So I'm certainly agree with that and value the fact that you're doing that for the people around you. So kudos to you for leading the way on that front. And so maybe we can shift gears a little bit as we think about what you're doing currently for Nasdaq, and you look at the Director of Information Security Governance and compliance role that you have. What does that mean for you, and what does that mean when you think about maybe the intersection of policy, standards, and technology?
Yeah, I mean, it's been such a fascinating space to be in, in almost the 10 years that I'm here. When I started, we were a small team. We've continued to expand year after year. And it might sound nerdy, but I love the governance aspect of it, right? Like, I love that, I engage with so many different stakeholders, not just in InfoSec, but in the business. And that, my job and my role is to really take these super complex technical things and be able to translate them for the business, for our board, for our regulators, but then also ensuring we're aligning with an industry standard or an industry framework.
And since you brought it up, I'll ask because we continue to get lots of questions at the board level. I mean, cyber is truly everywhere. And when you start to think about governance and compliance in the realm of cyber and the board and senior executive management, what do you think is the best advice you could give some of our listeners in terms of how do you articulate sometimes very complicated business challenges overlaid with cyber to the board or senior executive management so that they can not only rationalize the information, but I think sometimes because cyber is everywhere, that people get anxious or panicked or I don't know what to do with all the information. So, how do you kind of put that into the gobbledygook into something that makes sense for the audience?
hmm I think the first thing is to really make sure you have an open dialogue, understanding the board's level of cyber awareness. And if it's something that they want to be more educated on, we feel like it's our responsibility to help educate them too. So if they want to have special sessions with maybe, the Department of Homeland Security or someplace that can really set the stage, that's a great way to start to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same playing field. But it needs to be a dialogue, right? It can't just be, okay, we're the InfoSec people, this is what we think is important, this is what we're going to talk about. We want to make sure that we really are hearing the specific concerns and addressing them.
It's important. I think again, when you talk about, security, you talk about business, you talk about the technology, the policies, the governance, there's so many sides, if you will, of cyber. And so I do think having that conversation and dialogue becomes critical. Otherwise, I think people jump to conclusions about what they do or don't need to know about cyber. And when they don't hear certain things, maybe they start to ask more questions versus, again, to your point, the education and the ongoing dialogue necessary to have that. So definitely agree with that. And I think when you think about NASDAQ and perhaps some of the expansion around new financial products and services and different models and transformation, what do you think
Mhm.
are some of the key cyber challenges when you think about new technologies or just transformation in general? Because I don't know about you, but it seems like there's a transformation happening every day, every place we turn. So, I mean, there's definitely transformation has been afoot and will continue to be afoot. So, what would be maybe some critical success factors around cyber?
Yeah, so I think I'll kind of approach it a different way, and this is one area that my team's responsible for, and it's actually one of the more exciting. I'll make it exciting. I'm going to sell everyone, everybody on this area of cyber, but it's the due diligence requests we receive from our customers, right? So at Nasdaq, we have a variety of products and services. Many people know us as part of the critical infrastructure and the exchange, but we also sell kind of corporate solutions products, one of those products being an online board portal for board of directors. So we have such a broad suite of products and we're processing such different types of data that our clients naturally have questions about our security posture. They have questions about our information security program. They have question about the actual controls within the products. And what we've recently done is actually centralized responsibility for response to those questions within my team. So it's really been an area of opportunity, not only for my team to grow, but really for us to understand the direct impact of what we're doing on a day to day basis and how that translates to the client. and how the clients expect us to have that rigorous program in place. So it's really interesting being in that feedback loop now over the past 5 years and seeing how the understanding of our clients has increased, how just there's regulatory pressure as well to complete these reviews and really seeing the types of questions that they're asking us. And it's really good feedback into our program, right? If I repeatedly see clients asking us something and we don't have that, or we don't have an answer that I'm satisfied with, I can take that in and put that into our processes and make sure we have that control in place. And we're getting inundated now with questions on the cloud, right? Where is our strategy? What are we doing? If we do have anything deployed in the cloud, and then it's the education opportunity again, understanding that the traditional on-prem security controls might not be applicable in the cloud environment and how we communicate that.
Yeah, and one thing as I'm jotting down notes as you're talking, because so many great key takeaways. Underscore clients, people, personally and professionally, expect cyber and security and diligence and compliance to kind of be built into the processes. What would you say would be core foundations of cyber programs to make sure that those foundational components are addressed? Because I do agree that there's definitely a level of expectation. People may not know how to frame it, where to frame it, need to be explicit about it, but there's an expectation that's growing that things are going to be cyber secure. And so maybe
Mhm.
you could talk a little bit about what you think would be foundational in that aspect.
Yeah, so I think the first step would be a clear understanding of the business and the risks, right? As I was discussing earlier, we have different business lines. So
Hmm.
with our market and trading systems, there's different risks and there's different thresholds than there is with maybe the board portal solution. And you really need to then select an industry standard or framework that aligns with your risk tolerance because that'll dictate the level of controls. I'm not going to say one industry standard is better than the other. There's enough cross mappings out there that exist, right? Us in
Right.
this space, like, have seen so many spreadsheets with these things, but it's being able to very clearly articulate, we align to this. These are the controls in scope. If things are outside of the scope of your program, that's okay too, right? Um, and really just making sure you have that documentation and supporting documentation that's aligned to the industry framework in place.
Yeah, no, I mean, risk rationalization is a huge topic because, again, since cyber is everywhere and it's, in every facet of what we do, how do you overlay that with some, basis of objective basis, candidly, to understand the risk profile? And I definitely would repeat and agree with the commentary around knowing that each of the applications, processes, businesses have different risk profiles, and understanding how to change those becomes critical. Do you think there's a lot of conversation lately on, is there a way to predict that risk, and can we get better at using data to be able to predict risk? I mean, where do you is it a gut? Is it based on financials? Is it based on risk impact if, the marketplace were to be disrupted? Where do you how do you help your business lines understand from a business perspective the impact of risk in cyber?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an area that there's a lot of conversations going, is really where does kind of cyber risk live? Where has it traditionally lived? Where should it currently live?
Right.
How does that mesh with an organization's complete risk management framework? We're partnered very closely with our group risk team. We work with them on insurance requirements, but I think, if we're thinking about where there's been changes over the last 5 years and where there'll continue to be changes, I think this is definitely a space where we are now is going to look very different than where we'll be in 5 years because a lot of that data is coming in. I know, especially the insurance companies, they're really looking at, how can we actually quantify this, right?
Yeah,
How can
yeah,
we
no.
quantify the risk?
Everybody wants some magic mathematician or scientist to be behind all the data because it's terabytes of data that are just coming in. And again, there are ways certainly that we can leverage it. I think people are trying to find, are there holes to this thinking? Is it directionally correct? Does it need to be 100%? And I think some of that also comes down to how do you define critical assets, and how do you define the risk parameters or the risk tolerance that any either business unit or organization is willing to take? And so curious, with your thoughts in terms of with the changes. And I agree, what we do today is different than what we did 5 years ago, will be different than what we do 5 years from now. How do you think organizations and your clients should be looking at how they even define themselves to understand what assets they even have, whether it be the introduction of many more third parties, whether it be because of the introduction of IoT, you already mentioned cloud, all these things that are no longer quote unquote in the four walls. How do you think organizations should help themselves even define what that means for them? Like, what do I even need to protect?
Yeah, I think the foundational things are support from a group risk function, vendor management, that was kind of another that of the issues I flagged as really important. And I saw a stat recently, I don't know if I'm going to get the numbers exactly right, but 10 years ago, 5% of the internet traffic was to software as a service type providers. I think the last number I saw was it's up to 85%,
Wow.
right, of all traffic is to something like your Workdays, your sales
Right.
forces. And when you look at that just fundamental change in our perimeter, to your point exactly, your information security program has to adapt and has to change on that. We have to move away from, the building the castle walls, the, traditional defenses, because our data is out there and we have to know and understand it.
And mainly some of it's also by choice, right? I don't know about you, but I love my online shopping. I like to post about things. I mean, I am choosing, right, as an individual to put more and more information out there and have less and less control over what happens with that. And when you think about organizations needing to do business with external third parties, more and more the supply chain gets bigger and bigger. Vendor management, to your point, becomes more of a challenge. We see on a regular basis, interesting parts of, you mentioned cyber insurance is certainly continues to grow, but even in just contract negotiations, historically, cyber has been nowhere in a contract, whether it's a
Mhm.
cyber engagement or anything different. And now it's, well, you could be having five different subcontractors working for you. How are you managing their cyber health? How are you managing their cyber access into what is now our environment? So again, the ecosystem just is growing and growing and growing. And so I think having clients, and individuals as well, understanding what that perimeter looks like. And it's just completely, I think it's like take a crayon and maybe draw something around it, because it's definitely not a square and it's definitely not four
Yep.
walls.
Yep.
One thing you mentioned earlier was around compliance, and I'm assuming with your role, you're also not just from a compliance perspective, but well versed in the world of regulations and the regulatory environment.
Mhm.
Sometimes it becomes, kind of a difficult challenge for people to understand. You mentioned, the spreadsheets and the mappings, but I think even more broadly, when we look at policy and regulatory considerations, what do you see on the horizon of things coming up that, people and clients or organizations you're helping should be, kind of top of mind?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a very interesting space because, at least for us, we have many different regulators around the globe. So we can see the different perspectives and how each country and each region is really approaching cyber differently. In the US, we had Reg SCI, which was a very prescriptive, you have to have security controls in place. You had the CFTC with their system safeguard vulnerability that was, again, very prescriptive. You have New York DFS, which is, requiring encryption and MFA. And that's definitely one world. And I think at some points those are definitely helpful because it's fairly clear what the expectation is. And then you have in the EU the more kind of nebulous regulations and a real big focus on cyber resiliency
Mm.
and testing. So with Tiber, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that's implemented. I know a lot of the banks in those countries are working on their plans, kind of mirrored off of the CBEST approach from the UK. So that's definitely something I'm interested in kind of just seeing and tracking how those will influence or perhaps impact any US regulations as well.
One thing I'd be interested, since you brought up global, is, what's your perspective on data? We talked a little bit
Mhm.
earlier about data's coming in from everywhere, and I certainly see similar to what you said, everybody's kind of attacking things differently. Data continues to be an interesting phenomenon when we talk about global, not only because different countries are treating it differently. You obviously have nation states as well looking at data. And I would overlay that with, you also have different personal responsibilities. Like, does a person actually own their data, or is it lost in the ether the second you hit enter on your online shopping?
Mhm.
So curious to what your perspective is on data kind of in this global economy that we live in.
Yeah, I wish there was an easy answer. It's a big challenge, and I think, again, if we're talking where we're gonna be in 5 years compared to where we are now, it's really something that information security and legal and the business need to be strongly considering and reviewing. It has significant impact, and it requires a lot of resources to really maintain. Um, thinking of GDPR, I think there was a lot of unintended consequences as well, and that a lot of InfoSec teams are really feeling the burden from making sure they can meet all of those requirements there.
Yeah, no, and what do you think? I'm curious. So, because again, agree completely. It's also causing major culture shifts, like what you were talking about, whether that be business, IT, people. And so, how do you think? Because again, I know going all the way back to the beginning of our podcast, where you talk about learning being core to what we need to do, and being surrounded by people to help kind of push us in some of these directions to continue to lean forward. What do you think we can do when we look at culture shift, and how to measure behavior change or holding people accountable in this world that candidly continues to be a little bit uncertain?
Yeah, so I think for that, our focus is on culture of security.
Mm.
We really want employees to understand that they're on the front line of defense, that they interact with the data, and there's a certain duty of care and responsibility that they have with the data and to be cyber vigilant.
Love
However,
it.
we also want to we also want to make sure that we're not viewed as business inhibiting. We want to
Mm.
be business enablers, and that goes back to the education piece as well.
Love the tie-in continually to education, growth, and continuing to push the envelope. Like I said, especially in this world of, I believe, uncertainty from a technological standpoint, a people standpoint, and obviously the cyber components that are interlaced within all of that. So certainly think that having the awareness and the desire to want to learn is going to continue to be critical for us. And so I'm going to switch gears a little bit into, I think, what is always my favorite part of the podcast, which is rapid fire questions. So things that come to your mind, I mean, feel free to elaborate, but whatever first comes to your mind. So what does it mean most to you if I were to say you are a resilient leader? What does resilient mean to you?
Resilient means inherent strength and just the ability to take issues as they come, react calmly, process and really exemplify strength to the team.
Excellent. We all stumble at some point in our career. I know I have, and I learn from those stumblings. Do you have any pivotal learning experience that you feel like you've really grown from and helped shape kind of the pivot that you took because of that experience?
Yeah, I think one experience is I talked about having a great manager. And conversely, there's been a time when I had a challenging manager. And when you're in it, in the day to day, it can be really defeating and it can be really hard. And you see how it impacts you from just a motivation standpoint. But being able to look back on it now, it was actually one of the best learning experiences I had because I was able to clearly see certain characteristics that I know I never wanted to emulate when it came to being a leader within the organization.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because you're right. When you're in it, it's not, it's defeating, it's demoralizing, it's downright depressing. I'll take all the D words there. And I'm sure there's more that can be added to the list. But the things you can take from what you don't want to do, there's another D word, but the things that you don't want to do, or perhaps can learn from that to again, it's still a learning experience, as defeating as it may seem in that moment. So
Yep.
certainly valuable for any one of our listeners right now who may actually be in that moment and think that there's no out. Look at it to see what that learning experience may be able to be. And as you mentioned before, learning what will keep going on with your role models that you've had in your life. You certainly have already mentioned your family. You've got an incredible CEO. You've got the Women in NASDAQ program. You're heavily involved in other organizations outside of NASDAQ. Aside from perhaps the women that you've already mentioned in your career journey, are there any other leaders or individuals in your life that you really admire and the strengths that they have provided to you along the journey?
Yeah, I think Adina, I would be remiss in mentioning her, not mentioning her, but the first female CEO of an exchange and just her career journey. I think it's really admirable. She started NASDAQ as an intern actually, and now is CEO. And also, I'm in a book club, so try to have some other interests outside of work and children. And we actually just read Michelle Obama Becoming, and I think her story, it was so inspiring and another clear example of leading with empathy that really resonated.
Well, I was going to totally jump in with favorite book or the most recent book, so I'm glad you answered that. And I already answered that for our listeners. And I want to give you, huge congratulations. You were recognized as the Rising Star Award honoree by the Women's Bond Club in 2015. And obviously, by all stretch of the imagination, I'm confident you continue to lead from the front as it relates to the individuals in your organization, in your personal and professional life. I'm curious to know, how do you pay it forward to help mentor other young professionals in the career that they look to either have now or don't even know, to your point, maybe they don't have their game plan, they don't know their steps. How do you pay it forward to others around you?
Yeah, so we have a really strong mentorship program here internally that I've been a part of, both as a mentor and a mentee. I encourage all of my staff to participate in that. And then, we have some great volunteer opportunities that the Women's Network here organizes. One we've done a few times is working with the New York Hall of Science, which here in New York is a really great resource. It's out in Queens, and they really mentor the local population there, the high school students and college students, particularly women, in STEM careers. So we've done events where we've had them come here, we've gone out there and really, modeled what potential careers could be.
That's amazing. I'm incredibly passionate as well about introducing STEM. We've done quite a bit in K through 12, high school programs, college age, et cetera, just to really continue to talk through what STEM programs mean, how they can evolve for our young females, and obviously looking at children in K through 12 and what we can do for young adults. So I'm super passionate to hear you're equally as passionate in that desire to help continue to push that program, because it's such an amazing way. And I feel like sometimes we lose sight of that. So to hear I'm not sure what hours of the day you find to continue to do that, but it sounds like you're obviously, and as well as NASDAQ, putting STEM programs first, which is wonderful to hear. So given that, it sounds like your job and like mine is fairly demanding on your time, particularly with international travel. Again, cyber doesn't ever seem to rest. I seem to believe that everything happens Friday at like 5 or over the weekend. So we never have a disaster, Monday at 9. They always seem to happen Friday at 5. So what do you do to just balance your time? And as you said, the book club earlier, but how do you balance time?
Yeah, I think it's really important for me to have, to have work and have when I'm work be present here, and then at home be present at home. And fortunately or unfortunately, I have an hour commute where I sit on a train, and I really try to take that time and use it in which way I think is going to be the most productive. That could be taking a nap. Let's be honest. Sometimes we all need to do that. But that could be reading the book club. It could be checking in on work. It could be watching the Great British Baking Show. But just really knowing that each day I have that hour that I can just sit and focus and prioritize. And if it needs to be me time, it can be me time, and not apologize for that.
It's super funny that you mentioned a nap. I think it was a couple of weeks ago now. I took a nap at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the weekend one day, and I'm not a napper. I can't even tell you the last time I took a nap. But after taking the nap, I was like, wow, I think maybe I like naps. And so, like, I think maybe my entire opinion on naps has kind of sort of changed, because I took I mean, and I think I was out cold. I think my husband woke me up a little bit after that. He's like, I don't think you moved. I was like, clearly I was tired, and clearly I need to rethink the strategy and the value of a nap. So
Mhm.
I am 100% now dedicated to trying to figure out if I like naps or not. So I really do appreciate your time here with us this afternoon. It's been intriguing, and certainly I am incredibly grateful for you being so authentic and transparent in terms of your career journey, your personal and professional goals. I have one last question, if you wouldn't mind me asking. And so, obviously, you've accomplished so much. I love hearing the drive and the passion in your voice. And I don't ever like to say, like, how do you define success? Because I think success is different for so many of us in so many different ways in the journey that we've gone. But what do you want to do next? I know you don't have the game plan and you're taking things step by step, but is there one thing that you'd love to be able to say, I really want to be able to do X?
Yeah, I think professionally, I really want to be able to take it to the next level, to be the deputy CISO or the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer of an organization. I think the governance framework and really having built our governance program from the ground up has given me that foundation, but really would love to kind of take it to the next step and be responsible for a holistic program in every single aspect of it.
Well, everything I have read about you or listened to today, I am 100% confident that you are going to get to that next step and probably going to get there pretty quickly. So if I'm betting, I'm going to bet you're going to get there pretty quickly. So all my money is on you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, again, thank you so much for joining me today. And the next time I'm up in New York, I may be swinging by for some chicken eggs or something like that. And if you move on to the goats, you never know.
Some fresh goat cheese.
I am there. So thank you again for your time. I do truly appreciate it. I'm not sure about you, but I am so amazed by everything that I just heard from Colleen. So thanks, Colleen, for your time and insights. With each interview, I'm humbled by the phenomenal individuals that are leading the charge in cyberspace. And of course, I'm also enamored by the fact that Colleen has chickens. Let's not forget their names, Andre 3000 and General So, and maybe goats in the future. So I'm super excited by all the things that she's doing in her personal and professional career. And I was taking notes literally throughout it around some of the just key takeaways that we can all learn from that, how to take complex technical issues and translate them into business savvy fundamentals, never having a game plan and taking things step by step. And most importantly, I was writing down being surrounded by not only good mentors, but also having management as a form of empathy. So if you've liked what you heard, stay tuned for more discussions with cyber leaders. Be sure to check out additional episodes on your favorite podcast channel and subscribe to our podcast at Deloitte.com/US/resilient. And feel free to connect with me on Twitter at Golden Hokie. That's GO1DENHOKIE. And be sure to ask me what that means. I'll be happy to share. So again, thank you so much for listening. Truly appreciate it.